In this video, I'll go over my experiences as a Catholic with a homosexual tendency that was discovered later in life. I will cover the different spiritual discoveries that I have made along my journey. These videos summarize the testimony that I gave in the book Homosexuality at the Risk of Faith, published in February 2020. In that book, I wanted to show that one can, at the same time, be homosexual, Catholic, and defend the Church rationally, point by point, while being realistic about the defects of some of its members. To begin, I will mention two very special periods of my life: childhood and my life in the seminary. When I was a child, my faith went deep. I grew up in a very religious family, in the countryside, and believing in God was taken for granted. The experience of sin was very anecdotal, and my interior life was never disturbed. People are often surprised by the faith that was omnipresent in the Middle Ages, but when you live in the country, you can quickly understand things like that. The stability and calm of the everyday life allows faith to grow quietly. Without a billboard, you can see the sky better. The world is simple, stable, and so are commitments, even if there are things to be aware of, like being isolated. When I was 12, I experienced my first spiritual shock, the pilgrimage to Lourdes. It was both an extraordinary and difficult time. The suffering of the people there is never shown in the media, because it is overshadowed by the more sensational aspects of trashy religious tourism. In reality, it is a lot of suffering as well as an immense hope. It was there that I felt the supernatural force of this hope, an immense strength of life, something maternal. Not Gaia or Mother Earth, but the Virgin Mary. She was an immense call to the very depths of my soul. It was the opposite of a superstition. It was a feeling that I had never felt and never expected. Something infinitely sweet. Not irrational, but beyond reason. Precisely the opposite of a mystification. Something that did not obey any script or fantasy. Something that left my ego miles away. At school, I was a bit uncomfortable with the other students. Also, my personal interests isolated me, much like a lot of the young people today. I was sensitive and people made fun of me to my face. I was lucky, however, not to have experienced harassment on social media. Nevertheless, I endured insults like faggot, sissy, on a regular basis, and at the time words like that were not frowned upon. Besides, everyone knows that kids are very cruel to each other. This isn't talked about enough because we have a naive view of childhood. We are not like everyone else, we are quickly isolated. In fact, I rapidly preferred to talk with supervisors and adults rather than my peers. I also like drama. By getting out of myself, by pretending to be other people, I could get out of the daily routine. At 15, I went to high school, which was a boarding school. I had already decided to join the seminary and become a priest. This is when I started reading theology. I found things there that shook my worldview a great deal. In France, religion is a taboo subject, and talking about theology resulted in people looking at me as if I had said an obscene word. Who knows how many vocations were snuffed out due to this reflex. It was at that time that I started to have strange feelings for boys. There was one in particular, and I didn't understand anything about it. Every school holiday I wrote him letters, but he never wrote back. It was precisely at that time that my homosexual inclination started to come forth. A little later, I met a wonderful priest. He became my spiritual guide for 5 years, until I entered the seminary. In 1997, I entered the seminary in the city of Ars. I was very eager to become a priest. The first year was wonderful. My family had accepted my choice, an organized rhythm of life, and a high quality of studies. All that I found in the seminary. The problem was that after the first year, I became disillusioned. That's when I experienced the worst hurt. In fact, I went through a huge 2-year breakdown because I found out all at once what I had been hiding for years. I discovered my homosexuality, in the sense that I really became conscious of it. Before, I was in a complete denial. even when I was called a fag at school. This awareness came during an Ignatian retreat. I described it in my book, so we'll skip the details here. What I can say here is that I fell into a very negative spiral. It starts in the head, then it consumes you from the inside, and then things became worse when I wanted to be open about it. I decided to play it straight and to entrust all this to my spiritual father. He truly listened to me, but he did not understand. You would think that by opening up, it would have been helpful, but it really wasn't. That thoughtlessness completely froze me. There was honestly never a rejection from the seminary, but an imperceptible, distancing attitude, which was very hurtful. This is unfortunately how it often happens in the church. The church does not reject, to the contrary of what atheists believe. On the other hand, some priests know how to be distant, like nobody else. The nuance is very important. I sank into a terrible state of depression and wasn't helped in that regard. I was in great distress, but I quickly wanted to get back on track. I put a lot of effort into pretending that I was okay. I accepted everything. I accepted being a good little soldier. I played rugby. I accepted obedience like never before. Inside myself, however, I was totally torn apart. One morning, I summoned up enough courage and went to see my spiritual father. I told him that I could no longer continue as such, and that I wanted to leave the seminary. His answer was clear when he told me, "Gaetan, you cannot leave. If you leave, you will fall." What I heard was rather, "You will go to hell." And that made me feel claustrophobic. I don't know if any of you out there ever experienced this feeling, the impression of being stuck between four walls and having them slowly closing on you. I should point out that the church has never abandoned me, but the reactions of some of the priests were, quite frankly, confusing. This resulted in 2 years of being subjected to exorcism prayers. Why? To cure my homosexuality. My spiritual father even suggested that I go to Canada for an inner healing retreat. I went there, naively thinking that my participation in this retreat would cure me of my homosexuality. Of course, as you can imagine, it didn't work at all. I remained gay, homosexual. Then I completely lost ground. I'll tell you about it in the next video. Thank you very much for listening. See you very soon. Hello everyone. In this second video, I will tell you about my experience after leaving the seminary. This was a very difficult phase. In 2002, I wanted to accept my homosexuality. I was 26 years old. I didn't really have a teenage identity crisis in the past, so I think I experienced it later in life, as if it had been repressed. After my misadventures at the seminary, I dove headfirst into the gay world. It was as if I wanted to catch up with everything I had not done before. I initially had the idea of meeting a nice guy and living a sincere love, but it was a waste of time. I sunk into sex addiction with multiple relationships, with no future. I tried everything, like in a movie, and fast forward. I'll skip the details, they are in my book, and it's not very poetic. To make it simple, I adhere to the LGBT theories. Sexual pleasure, outdoor experiences in the woods, the apps. I had done it all and fell into addiction. And I didn't care because I was told that this was freedom. This is where I blamed the LGBT narrative. It led me into debauchery, and by the time I figured it out, it was too late. This pattern is the constant threat to the young gay man full of ideals. He goes to the city with a flourishing heart, he returns with a sore ass. Beyond the party life, the lights always fade away in the morning sun. The gay world is full of this excessive craziness. In the end, it's a massacre and the young are in the firing line. Drugs, the injection of sport, sexual performance. It exhausts a person like a poison. The side of reality is never exposed. Why? Because nobody wants to risk being called a homophobe. The slightest criticism, and you get attacked with all sorts of defamatory names. Just like people are often called racist for anything and everything nowadays. The worst part is that, at the same time, my life seemed to be going pretty well. I was employed, I had gone back to school to study at a business school. I got my master's in human resources, I found a new job, and moved to the city, Paris in my case. And there you can imagine, it was full of temptation. saunas, orgies, drugs, you name it. And then one day, the party was over, as I tested positive for HIV. During that dark period, I never lost my faith. I had just drifted away from the practice. I fell very low. And that's where Providence came in, and I met some really good people. I had the chance to start a relationship with a very handsome boy, and it was very straightforward. For the first time, genuine feelings appeared. It was a nice love story. In 2013, I met Jonathan, a boy who was seeking a spiritual path. Our discussions about faith and spirituality helped me to move forward. I accompanied him through baptism, thanks to my knowledge of the seminary. It was he who reconciled me with the Catholic Church. Even though I was the one accompanying him, Providence ends up having its ways. In December of 2015, my life was dealt a huge blow. My sister Charlene died in a car accident, a reckless driver on the road. She was 29 years old and had 2 children. At that moment, I was angry with God and His Son and cursed them, but I'll spare you the details. One morning, I robotically went back to a church, and that's when Providence struck me down again. I mechanically took Holy Communion, and I returned to my seat, and then it was incredible. I was overwhelmed by a terrifying dizziness. Horrible visions flashed before my eyes. I had not been using any kind of substance in any way. It was much more than a vulgar bad trip. It was like a procession of filthy beasts approaching me. I've gone into these details in my book, so we'll move on. Suddenly, in the middle of all this, I called out to Jesus. In an instant, I handed over to Him all my pain and sorrow. Then it was like a huge torrent, an immense force of love. It flowed over me. It cannot be described, not scientifically or rationally. It was above all that. I felt illuminated. I won't say more about what I saw and felt, though I finally had the strength to stand up and take back control of my life. I decided to follow the gospel and live in the continence of chastity, and it became an inner healing of joy. This I can guarantee you. For us people with homosexual tendencies, it is truly beneficial. Only God's grace and our freedom can accomplish this miracle. Anyway, I will stop here for today. Be strong, and see you soon.